give a warm welcome to Gordon Brown.
Thanks very much. Is this on now? All right. Thanks very much. This is a real treat for me because I get to think back in my early days, and I enjoy it more than you will, I think. I'd like to start by reading a little bit about my dad. This is a very short summary of my dad's work in architecture by Ron Gourley, who was the dean of the College of Architecture at the University of Arizona in the past. And I think he captured my dad as an architect very well, and so I'd like to read this. This exhibition, Arthur T. Brown, architect, artist, inventor, illustrates in word, photograph, and drawing the 50-year achievement of a remarkable and dedicated man, dedicated in his own words to doing unusual and creative things. Words, in his way of life, are used sparingly, delivered with good humor and a twinkle in the eye, and go to the essence of an issue regarding architecture. Good design is direct and simple, without much eyewash. So that pretty well summarizes my dad's feeling about architecture. I'm starting with this first slide, and we can turn the lights down now. This is the house that my dad designed for our family. And you notice that it's quite small and even more modest than it is small. That window to the right is the bedroom window of the room that I shared with my brother Tom. And the next window is the living room window. And then there's the door, and then there's the garage in front. And the neighbors really raised a ruckus when this house was when they started construction, and they realized the garage was going to be in front. This was unheard of in Tucson in those days. All the garages were made of corrugated iron, nailed on a 2x4 framework, and they were always in the back of the lot. And so to see one out here, in fact, it wasn't just Tucson. This house was exhibited at the Art Museum in Buffalo, New York, and they said that this was an indication of the coming of the motor age. This was back where, well, for horse and buggies, it was good to be in the back because you didn't want the fertilizer and all of that right out in front. So that was the way they did it. Anyway, this was my house. Could we change to the next slide, please? And this is my favorite residential job that my dad ever did. Now, this house is the Ball Paler house. This was a solar house. As Ron Gourley had mentioned, my dad liked to do creative and inventive things. And so he had two awnings that went around on a track on the bottom. There were wheels that went on the edge of that, and a little bracket to hold the post to the vertical at the edge of the concrete. And then there was like a rolling door track on the fascia of the house where this went around. So this could shut out the morning sun or the afternoon sun, or they could have it open. So this was one of my dad's big interests was solar and energy conservation in architecture. So this is one of the early examples. Next slide, please. You'll notice that we're not using all the modern devices. I'm wanting you to feel that you are part of the modernist movement in Tucson pre-World War II. And we have the devices from pre-World War II. We have, instead of a fancy computer thing, why we have a slide projector, which, if any of you want to come up and see it after the work, you certainly may look at it. Anyway, this slide, this is the front entrance to the Rosenberg house. This house was built right at the close of World War II, about 1946 or 47. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the principles of design, because they may be interesting to you too. This has Grand Canyon flagstone on the front, and it's been sliced and it's laid flat so that the edge shows, and that gives a horizontal line. This house had a plan that my dad called an inline plan. That meant that everything in the whole house was just one long line. And they didn't have skateboards and things in those days, but when you see the hall, why, you'll know that that would have been a help. But anyway, he liked the horizontal feel of that, and so he has the edges of this Grand Canyon flagstone facing you, and they're laid horizontally so that the joints run horizontally, and the windows even are what they call Bermuda sash, and they have, instead of a pane of glass, they have a strip of glass like a Venetian blind. And when you open the window, why, all of those strips are completely horizontal. When you close it, they're all vertical. So that was, those were the horizontal elements there. And then in the front door, you'll notice there were horizontal louvers. So there's that horizontal feel. And then there's the white roof and the white windowsills and the white doorway. It's always important to accent an entrance to a building. Then you don't need to put signs up. All right, next, please. This is the back of the Rosenberg house, and you notice there's some weeds in the under the window, and that's where I was before I got here, trying to get some of those weeds out of the way. But we didn't quite get that accomplished. But here's the window, and this is a solar house. You'll note that the roof is tilted so that for this latitude, it's just right for the winter sun. The sun would come in there. There are Venetian blinds the full height of that window, and you'll see that you can see them partially open in this view. The master bedroom is down at that other end. Next slide, please. This is the hall that I told you about. The garage is way down at the end. The Venetian blinds are on the left side. The right side is a heat sink, a masonry wall, a solid masonry wall that held the heat that came in all day through the window. This is called a passive solar house because the occupants had to do a little work. They had to be sure at night to close the blinds to hold the heat in, because the heat is going to move both directions out, and so you don't want to lose that heat. The wall, the blue wall on the right, was painted that dark blue to absorb the heat from the sun. And next slide. This is the living room. The white wall on the right is the back side of that wall on the blue wall that I showed you in the hall. And this house was built probably a couple of years before Trome invented his Trome wall, which was the same kind of a thing, a little more elaborate, but it sprang from the same design. You'll notice the furniture in this house. That was what was the idea of modern furniture in the about 46, 47. Next slide. This is the McGinnis house. It has a roof that is a solar or a hyperbolic paraboloid. And a hyperbolic paraboloid is like a saddle. It pokes up at the two ends, and it comes down like a saddle on the side. Now this roof was put on, this is a very mild hyperbolic paraboloid. It was made of 2 sheets of corrugated aluminum. And the bottom sheet, it was a sandwich, and it had insulation in between. And the bottom sheet and the top sheet, the corrugations ran at 90 degrees angle with each other. And you can do that with a hyperbolic paraboloid. The interesting thing about that shape is that you can rotate every line in the hyperbolic paraboloid can be a straight line, and you rotate them. And that makes the shape. You rotate it and it comes down. So the insulation that was put in between these 2 sheets was more than just insulation. It was also the binder to hold those two, to separate the 2 sheets and to hold them together. It was an insulation that was it's a foam insulation, and they put it in with a nozzle. And that roof has no tar paper on top of it. That roof is probably a lifetime roof for Methuselah. Next. This is another house. This was Colonel Van Sicklen's house. This was built right after World War II. And Colonel Van Sicklen was it was the Army Air Corps then. He was a pilot in the Army Air Corps, and he bought this property in an area that was designed to be used by people who like to have their own private planes and have their hangar and keep their plane right at their home, like your car. And so that's what they did. Now the hangar for Colonel Sicklen's airplane is the one it's the building at the top, on the top right, and there's a folded plate roof on that hangar. And the interesting thing about this hangar that makes it really appropriate is that the shape of that roof is exactly like a paper glider that kids threw around in the classrooms at school. Then there's a swimming pool in between the roof and the house. The house is the building at the left, and it is bent in a C shape, and the whole composition is tied together by the C-shaped house and then the round patio wall that encircles the swimming pool, and then the hangar roof comes over the edge of to give a little shade over the one edge of the swimming pool. Colonel Van Sicklen enjoyed it because he would fly in the morning and he'd land his plane and put it in the hangar, and the dressing room for the pool was right at the end of the hangar near the pool, and he'd change and take a swim, and then he'd go in and have lunch. And next slide, please. This is the hangar door. And here's his plane. Next slide. This is the hangar on the swimming pool side. You can see it's a very small swimming pool. Next slide, please. This is an atrium. An atrium is an open space that is enclosed in a building. And this atrium has the front door to the atrium are the sliding glass doors that you see in the middle of the picture. And there's even a mailbox. I don't know, you probably can't see that from your seats. So people came in that front door and they were in the house, and because of our intense sun here, we decided that this atrium, or my dad decided this atrium would not be open to the sky as they usually are, but this has a resinous corrugated ceiling and a roof, so it's like a skylight. And so people really come in, they come into the house, into this big room, and then they turn to the left and go into the living room. and then the bedrooms are over on the toward me on this side. Next slide, please. This is the Braden house. This was also an Air Force person. He was a lieutenant colonel instead of a real colonel. But there was a new material that came out about that time. It was something that you could mix a resinous material with Portland cement, white Portland cement. And it was not supposed to crack. It was supposed to be wonderful stuff. And so that was put on by a local contractor, and that's what's called a Bermuda roof. If any of you have seen Bermuda houses, they're usually a pastel blue or pink with the walls, and then there's that white roof, and it's a stepped roof. And you'll see this roof again when I show you the pictures of this church, Faith Lutheran Church, which was designed by my dad. And if you look up from your seats, you'll see how this is laid out just shingle-wise. Goes right up with slabs. And this is not that way. This is all one piece. This is a poured roof, but it looks that way from outside. Next slide, please. This is a dormitory that my dad did. This is on Park Avenue at the northwest corner of the campus. And this dormitory it's a twin dormitory. All of the dormitories that during a period my dad was in practice were two dormitories put together, and then the common spaces for the dormitories, the lobby and the cafeteria and all of that, one common space would serve both dormitories. And so that's what this was. You'll notice the sunshades on the face of the building. That's a west wall. And so my dad put those aluminum, they were perforated aluminum sunshades to break some of that west sun. And the white section in the middle is an accent for the entrance to the building, to the doorway, which is right below that white band, vertical band. Next slide, please. This is another dormitory. It was originally a women's dormitory. I'm not sure what it is now, but it is still a dormitory at the university. It also has the aluminum sunshades on it. This is also on Park, but this is about in the center of the university. Next slide, please. This is the first dormitory that my dad did for the University of Arizona. This dormitory is right behind the old Bear Down Gymnasium, and right to the south of that gymnasium. And that is on slightly higher ground than this is. So my dad designed the courtyard here in one level here, and then you go through that opening under the middle part of the building. You go through that opening and you go upstairs to get to you go up steps. They're outdoor steps, like garden steps. You go up them to get to the level of the Bear Down Gymnasium. Next slide, please. I'm showing this slide because it's very important for architects to know how to draw. And because you have to make a presentation that will make your owner want to build that right away. And so this is what my dad did in a rendering. This is a rendering, and it would take him about 2 hours to do a thing like this. I think I would be all day working on that. But he could do it in a couple of hours. You'll notice in this rendering, you keep going back. A designer keeps going back. My dad hated the word style. He didn't like it at all. But he did use those flavors. And so this is Italian Renaissance palace design, where you have bands of different materials, and you have the first floor and the second floor, and many of the things on the buildings that the modernists were doing much of the trim was actually from old Greek and Roman days, because the architects who were doing the design work at that time were trained in what was called the Beaux-Arts method. And they had to learn the orders of architecture, the different columns and the capitals of the columns and all of the cornices that were used, and they had to make many drawings of all of that, and so they incorporated some of these things. And as you go around and look at some of the houses that were built during this time, you'll see that maybe the house seems pretty modern, but here's a territorial house, and here's an OG molding on it. So, next slide, please. This is Tucson General Hospital. I particularly like the way this mass is together. The composition with the two elevator towers at each end, and then it has a sunscreen on the south wall. This front wall of the hospital faced south. This is on Campbell. It is now a cancer center for the University of Arizona, and unfortunately they had to tear this down because the osteopaths who owned this hospital didn't have the money to make huge floor ceiling heights, so they had to cut it down to save money, and that didn't give the cancer group enough space for their equipment, so they ended up having to tear it down. But I was relieved they saved some of the sunscreen. Let's turn to the next slide, and that's the sunscreen. That's a detail of the sunscreen. There's a hood on it, aluminum perforated hood, and then a square window in the center, and a curtain wall around it, and vertical and horizontal structural members that supported the frame but not the building. Next slide, please. This is what architects often call a jewel box. This is a very small, unassuming building. This is called the Southside Presbyterian Church. It started out as a mission church in Tucson, and it was paid for by the Smith Brothers. I don't know how many of you remember Smith Brothers licorice cough drops, but those Smith brothers on the box, there was a man looking at another man, and they both had beards, and the same thing is on the brass plaque on this building to show that it was a Smith Memorial Chapel, but it's called the Southside Presbyterian Church. My dad did not do this whole building. The box of the building behind the facade, those are the original walls of the Smith Memorial Chapel. There was a fire in that chapel that burned the roof off and damaged the walls, but not beyond repair. And so they were repaired. But my dad put this facade on there because it didn't cost very much money, and it gave it an awfully elegant look. By saying it didn't cost very much money, you'll notice there are tiny bells between the two steel columns on each side that support the roof of the facade. And then in the center is the original church bell, that bigger bell. Now the small bells have USN on them. They were bought surplus. They were bought surplus, and the USN all faces inside, so people don't notice it. But anyway, I think they cost $10 a piece. And a bell is an extremely expensive item. So you can see that this saved them a lot of money. Next slide, please. Oh, I'd like to also say that this Southside Presbyterian Church was shown in Peru in a Pan American exhibit that was it was selected. It was one of 4 churches selected by the State Department to be in that exhibit. So it's a very well recognized building. This building, this is the church you're sitting in. This is Faith Lutheran Church, and it has that Bermuda roof on over this building, and that roof was an example of another thing that my dad liked to do. It's very hard for architects or anyone, any person, to create much. That's really God's job. But you can learn how to use the things you see and realize around you, because those things, you can combine them into something that will be your creation, but you haven't created all of these elements. And so this roof is made out of a material called Flexicor. This Flexicor roof was used as a floor in high-rise buildings, as the floor in the roof structure. And it's hollow, the length of it, so they can run the utilities down. And the two sides of those concrete planks, the two edges are solid, and there are steel rebars that run through those to support them. And so these span from these arches here. These are steel arches, and there are steps that the planks rest on. And yes, there's a little pin that goes up into each one so they don't slide down, because these are not horizontal, those steps. But anyway, that's using a material for a different purpose, and it gives you some design freedom. The roof has a coating on it, it has a membrane on it, similar to the one that was put on the Braden house to keep it waterproof. The tower at the end, and my dad, when he designed things, he would think about a lot of things. He would think about shades and shadows. That's the reason that this church is turned this way, and that's the reason that the tower is on this end. The tower is on the east end of the church, because that gives you a shadow up here, and a shadow up in here, and it further accents the door to the church. If it was on the other end of the building, why, you wouldn't have that benefit. Next slide, please. This is where we are sitting. We're here. The arrangement of these arches. This first arch is what in a theater would be called the proscenium arch. And if you go to many churches, you'll see that they often do that. The old cathedrals did that. They had the proscenium arch right in front of right on the edge of the platform. And you see this is where all of the church ceremony takes place, and the proscenium arch is right here. Then the old cathedrals did not have pews. The people came and stood for the service. And that big aisle that they stood in was called the nave. And the nave is a Latin word for boat or ship. And if you'll look up overhead here, it looks like you're sitting underneath an overturned rowboat or something. You see all the strakes on the boat. Next slide, please. This is the first Christian church on Speedway. This church was built also right after, in the 50s, right after World War II. The chapel is on the left. It has vertical elements on the windows, so the windows don't face the street. It keeps some of the noise out. The glass on the windows is on the edges and not on the side. Over on the main sanctuary, they have vertical elements there too, and those fins, the columns go up at about every third pew row, the column will go up and the fin will go in there. And my dad designed that so that the ushers could take up the collection without bothering the people in the service. And so you could move, and if you came late, you could move down the aisle and no one would see you until you popped into one of the pews. So this was the first Christian church. This church also received some awards and was published in a lot of magazines and books. Next slide, please. This is a school. This is Rose Elementary School, Tucson Unified School District. The important thing about this school is that it also has a lifetime roof on it, an aluminum roof, and the roof is a combination of a structural piece that spans from wall to wall. The bottom part of the roof is just bent in a U, so it's a trough, but by bending it, this is a shape that we call a channel. And when you bend it that way, it's a structural thing. And so it will span that. And then the lid on top of it, the actual roof membrane, is also aluminum, and it clips right on top of the two abutting channel walls to seal them off so they don't leak. And you get that roof has no tar paper on it either. And then this is the solar feature of that roof. It is tilted and oriented so that it takes advantage of the winter sun and not the summer sun. And of course, the beauty of school buildings is they're not used in the summer, so you don't have that problem. The heat is the important thing. But anyway, the warm air goes up in this enclosed channel, and then there's a header across the top of that, another channel that goes 90-degree angle to those roof channels, and there are fans located there, and they pull the air up. The warm air is going to go up anyway, but if you have a fan pulling it, it'll go up even faster. And so that was the way that was done. And then that channel that goes across had the grills in it to provide warm air in the classrooms. Next slide, please. This is a construction photograph, so there's not a stick of landscaping around. This is a school another elementary school. My dad did several elementary schools for TUSD, and this was one of the later ones. I worked on this one myself. This has a ridge that goes down the center of the classroom, and that ridge is hollow. It's like a tunnel on the ridge of the roof, and that's a mechanical tunnel, and it makes it so that the maintenance people can go up there, and all of the piping and electrical stuff is all right there where they can get to it. Next slide, please. This is Utterback Junior High School. That's a TUSD building that my dad did. It again has a metal sunshade. My dad used lots of the sunshades. The entrance is that sort of L-shaped arrangement there on the right side of the picture. Next slide, please. This is Babakever Union High School. This is in Sells, Arizona, and it was fully funded by the United States government. And this is the only building that I've ever worked on where it was not important how much it cost. The important thing was that the number of square feet in each classroom and in the gymnasium and in the locker rooms and in the cafeteria area, they all had to be not less than the average of square footage throughout the United States for those type rooms in a school. And the HHFA was administering this, and they went around and they collected all this data, and so we had to design the thing so that the Tohono O'odham's kids would be in spaces that were just as good as any spaces that the rest of us had. So that was an interesting thing about that school. You'll see there's some rounded walls. It's a little bit of a Pueblo feeling, I think, but there are no poles, no vigas sticking out. Next slide, please. This is the courtyard of Babakivri High School. The gymnasium multi-purpose room is the big block there in the middle. Then this is the courtyard. The classrooms are down one side and the administrative spaces are down another side, and then more classrooms come outside the picture here. We were allowed some money for artwork on this because it was a federal project, and so the god for the Tohono O'odhams is I'itoi. And you've probably seen the circular maze with a little man standing at the opening of that maze. That's the emblem of the Tohono O'odham nation, and we decided that the artwork in the courtyard would be a statue of I'itoi. And there you see the statue. It was made out of concrete, and the concrete was cast on styrofoam, and the sculptor made the form with styrofoam, and he cut the pieces that would be the reverse of what he wanted to show out of styrofoam and fastened them into the form. And then when the concrete set up, he just pulled the form off and got his jackknife out and cut out all the styrofoam out of all of the little depressions in the thing, and so he had his piece of sculpture all done for him. The Tohono O'odham school board and the kids were amused by this statue of I'itoi, because we found out after it was built, after I'itoi was constructed and put up, that the real I'itoi is only 3 inches tall. And this statue was 9 feet. Next, please. This is another high school, Patagonia Union High School. My dad actually fabricated that their emblem for their school. It's a coyote or a bear, or not a bear, a coyote or a wolf, I think. But anyway, he made that for them, and then they had letters that stand out from the wall. Next slide, please. This is the entrance to the Patagonia Union High School. This is the administrative office place and the library back in there. The tall building to the right is their multi-purpose gymnasium and cafeteria and auditorium building. Next slide, please. This is another picture of work under construction. So there's no landscaping around, no paving or anything like that. This is the Tucson Fire School, Tucson Fire Training Center. And the building here is a lecture hall and some classrooms. The tower sticking up in the back is a training tower that the firemen practice on, and there are windows so they can try to carry people out windows, and they can rappel down the walls and use their ladder drills and all. And clear at the end, there's a small garage, is what I would call it. The fire department calls those things apparatus rooms. But that apparatus room has one fire truck in it, which is an old one that is too old to be in service, but they use it for training. And so it's housed in that. Next slide, please. This is the second College of Law building at the University of Arizona. The first one, I remember when I was a student there, and then this one was built to replace that. Now this building has been torn down because ground is so valuable in the university, and I think the mathematics building is standing where this building used to be. Next slide, please. This is a folding roof, a sunroof. This is at the Tucson Chamber of Commerce, the old Tucson Chamber of Commerce. So this also has been torn down. But there was an electric motor that operated this so that when they had events at night, they could open up the roof of this patio and be out under the stars. And then if it was raining, well, they could just close it. But it was like a skylight. Next slide, please. This is the office where most of that work was done. A very small office. It was right next to my dad's house. And I worked there with my dad for 20 years and really enjoyed that time. That's the last of this. Are there any questions that I might help with?
I wanted you to tell them about your dad when he was at Ohio State University, where he ranked in his class.
Oh, yes. My dad was a very talented architect. He graduated from Ohio State University School of Architecture, and he received the AIA, American Institute of Architects, School Medal. The AIA gives one medal a year to each architectural school to award to their top student every year. And so he started out being very successful in school, and then when he got to work, he just was so inventive. Well, I better say this. My dad, before he went to Ohio State, he went to a small church college, a liberal arts college. And he went there because his dad was a professor there, and he could go free. So he went. And he majored in chemistry, which doesn't seem like it's very helpful to an architect, but it really is. And the one thing about that my dad always had in the back of his head, he liked to experiment with things. He wanted to do new and original things. And the scientific method that he learned in chemistry was something that he followed, and whenever he had a chance to do something different in a building, he did. But he had to be careful. He didn't want to be sued. So you learn to be very, very careful, but you still want to take a little bit of a chance and do something that's going to be different. And yeah, yes. Then my dad, the next thing that happened to him in the way of awards, he became what they called a fellow in the American Institute of Architects. The AIA elects outstanding architects from different areas periodically, and they have what they call the College of Fellows, and that college elects them. And then my dad was the first fellow in the American Institute of Architects in the state of Arizona. And then the AIA has regions. We're in the Mountain States region of the American Institute of Architects, Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado and Utah. And my dad received the silver medal from the Mountain States region of architects, and that's the next medal down. The gold medal is the one that they gave to Frank Lloyd Wright and some of those people. The gold medal is given by the National AIA, It's once a year, or maybe not even that often. And the silver medal, the regions cannot give a gold medal because the national gives that. The regions give a silver medal. So he received that for this region. And then he was honored with a honorary doctor of fine arts, too, from the University of Arizona. So he was certainly recognized by his peers. If there are any questions, I certainly entertain them. Yes, sir.
What year did he come to Tucson, and why did he come to Tucson?
Yes. He came because of the Depression. Tucson, I think there were about 30,000 people in Tucson then. He came in we went to Phoenix in 1935, and in 1936 we moved to Tucson. My dad got a job in doing a school in Phoenix, not as an architect, but he was a draftsman then. And so he was hired because the architect in Phoenix needed to build up his drafting crew, because this was long before they had CAD, computerized design machinery. It was long before that, and so they had to have maybe a dozen men working over tables, drawing all of the stuff for a big building. Yes. Oh, why did he come? He came because he had that job offer, and we thought we would be going back to Chicago, but we didn't, because the AIA in Arizona just had one chapter. It was for the whole state, and they would drive every month, alternate months. They would have their meeting in Phoenix and Tucson, and so my dad belonged to that, and he got acquainted with a Tucson architect. So when the school job petered out in Phoenix, the architect in Tucson, there was an architect that gave him a job. And we stayed in Tucson ever since.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, sir.
Gordon, does your building, or more importantly, carport in back, have any historical preservation status?
The building that we have does not have a historic preservation status, no. And the house, neither one of them do. There's a hyperbolic parabola. You mentioned the carport in back. My dad would always build a mock building, mock up the thing so he could see, because when you're doing something a little bit new, if you start out on the job, why, maybe it's not going to go together very well. And so if you put it together once, why, then you understand what the problems might be. So before he put the hyperbolic paraboloid roof on the McGinnis house, he decided that he needed a carport, and so he would have a hyperbolic paraboloid roof on his carport. And so that was where he learned how to do it. But they don't have a historical status. It's a problem. The historical status, it's a problem for the owner of the property, because you're locked into having to preserve the exterior just the way it is. And sometimes that's hard on the owner. But I think the taxes are easier, aren't they? I'm not sure. Yes?
We live in one of your father's homes, and I'm wondering how many homes in town are still standing that were that your father designed.
Oh gosh,
Ballpark, I mean, are there hundreds? Are there?
No, it's more like in the thousands of buildings in town. I have 3 books. They're binders that they used to put the old catalogs of building materials in, and I don't know. There's probably 300 pages in each of those books, and each page is a different job, a different building. And I wish that they were organized so that we could find them. They aren't, because in those days you couldn't organize anything by addresses. A house would be built and it had no address, and the owner, when he moved into the house, went down to the post office and and signed up for an address. And that's how he got it. Now the addresses, you have them. So we didn't have any addresses. That's why I refer to all of these buildings by the name of the original owner. Any other? Yes?
The schools, how well have the design elements been preserved? And do you think the school boards recognize the importance of the architecture?
Well, I think maybe. I think the school does. But I think the school also has a lot of maintenance problems and a lot of, those are living buildings. And they have to be converted for this use and that use, and some of them closed and sold, and some of them reopened, and it's a very fluid arrangement in school buildings. So I think they pretty much have to operate the way they have to operate. Anything else? Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about how your father's work was received in the early years? You mentioned the neighbors were upset about your family.
Yes, they certainly didn't like a garage out in the front yard. There was another person. This was a small contractor in town, and he would always say, when he was doing work on some of my dad's jobs, he would say, "'Tain't customary. 'Tain't customary. 'Tain't customary." So he didn't think too much of him. I think also some of them maybe had slightly peculiar appearances that just weren't customary. And so people may not have gravitated toward those. But I think the interesting thing about my dad's designs is that he was able to work in modern stuff, or he was able to work in colonial stuff, or his own house is remodeled. It's a colonial style house with a pitched roof and a front porch, and my dad, when he grew up, lived in a Victorian house in Tarkio, Missouri. So he was able to get a flavor of any of those things in any project. Anything else? Oh, what about?
The U of A giving him a degree.
Oh, I mentioned that.
You said that.
Yeah. Fran, I couldn't get along without her help. I'm very glad to have her help. We've been married 60 years, and it's been great. Anything more?
Can you just tell us where your dad's house was?
Just tell what?
Your father's house, the one you mentioned, was colonial style?
Yes.
Where is it?
That is on Country Club Road. That is near the office, which I showed you as the last slide. And it is near it's right to the left of that building is my dad's house, my parents' house. And it's near the Benedictine convent, which, by the way, I hear is going to be phased out, and they're talking about closing it in maybe 5 or 6 years, I think. So that will be a real shock to that neighborhood. We're supposed to stop in 1 minute, so if there are any other questions, there's time for one more.
So how was the solar ideas received? Because that was a time when there was plenty of energy, and not many people were talking. He was way ahead of his time.
Yes, he was.
How were those ideas received at the time?
He had to push them.
Yeah.
He had to push for it. Solar energy is not cheap. You have to pay for the collector. You have to pay for the facility that you're going to store this energy in. You can't afford that if the electric bill is not high enough yet. But once it gets high enough, then they look for solar. and for energy conservation. Well, I've certainly enjoyed this, and I hope you have.